Budget control has, in the past, been unsuccessfully introduced to motorsport racing. The World Drivers' Championship, which became Formula One World Championship in 1981, in the past year introduced a budget cap to participating teams in its sport. It placed this cap at $140 million for 2022, and this time they are earnest about its enforcement. How do you control the budget in such an expensive sport? In this video, we are going to discuss how this budget cap has and will affect the teams in the future. We will also find out who still maintains the biggest budget regardless, and who is still struggling, and how this has affected their spending habits. Let's go. 2021 marked a pivotal moment in the international racing competition. The introduction of the cost cap, in essence, simply limits how much each team can spend each sporting year, and for 2022, it is $140 million, particularly on racing car performance. The cap is $5 million less than the 2021 cap of $145 million, and is still expected to be $5 million less in 2023. You may start to wonder, what are they thinking? Well, their justification for it is quite valid. This cap was introduced by the FIA for various reasons, like bridging the gap between wealthier and less wealthy teams, encouraging more people and brands to participate in the sport, leveling the playing field, and also maintaining financial sustainability and stability of the individual F1 teams, among other reasons stated by the body. Before this cap was introduced and strictly enforced, Mercedes reportedly spent the most money. They spent above $500 million during a season. They were followed closely by Red Bull and Ferrari, who have spent as much as $445 million and $463 million respectively in 2019. These big players always come out on top of each competition, and it is believed it is since they spare no expense in acquiring the latest gears, engines, engineers, and staff, alongside a host of other things if need be. In 2021, the first year this budget cap was introduced by the FIA, the limit was set at $145 million, and it is no surprise that in 2022, the big teams were able to successfully lobby their way into the increase in 2022, citing inflation and freight expenses. The FIA finally budged and increased the budget by 3.1% to cover the costs, and they still argue it wasn't enough. On the other hand, the cap was expectedly welcomed by the smaller teams, who were always struggling to keep up. Teams like Haas, Williams, and Alfa Romeo, who haven't scratched the $200 million mark just yet, agreed that the cap kind of leveled the playing field and gave them fresh hope in participating in the competition. This cap, however, doesn't include expenses like driver salary, cost of engines, and marketing. But progress is progress, right? The FIA has also stated multiple times in justification of their decision that the big teams always dominating was, in fact, taking away from the fun of the sport, hence the introduction of budget caps. This cap would allow the lesser teams to believe that they also have a shot at the title, and we are still watching to see how this plays out in the long run. The introduction of the market caps isn't the first attempt by the FIA to regulate team spending in the sport, but it has always been believed that teams should be allowed to use their resources to boost their chances. You may also wonder, how did they manage their budget before the cost cap? Teams have always had the liberty to spend as they deemed necessary. The top-level teams like Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari are known to expand their budget to fit their needs. Mid-level teams like Alpine and bottom-level teams such as Williams have always tried to tailor their needs to how much they were willing to spend. This move by the FIA has closed the budget gap between teams from hundreds of millions to tens of millions, and that, in itself, is believed to be a step in the right direction. So this cost cap doesn't dictate how these individual teams spend their money, within their ranks at least, but it does limit how much can be used to fund team efforts in each full year reporting period. All participants are then advised of full disclosure as such. So what happens when a team defaults? The FIA has stated categories that qualify as a breach of these rules. According to the FIA financial regulations, a body has been set up specifically for this purpose. The team that defaults any of the rules will face sanctions, These sanctions depend on the severity of the breach, and they can range from a penalty fine to exemption from the championships entirely. No group so far had flouted these rules except in May 22, when the sport's governing body fined Williams Racing $25,000 for breaching Formula One's cost cap regulations, when it missed a deadline to file the team's 2021 accounts. These new regulations of Formula One, as stated earlier, has gotten the mid to bottom level teams excited and hopeful. Mid-level team Alpine, who are financially backed by Renault, have been a bit vocal about their newfound enthusiasm for the sport. The CEO of Alpine, Lauren Rossi, had mentioned in the past that the budget cap between teams has condemned the rest of them to the mid and bottom field. So it will no more be about how deep the pockets of the teams are, but the sheer creativity and resilience of participating teams. Teams like Williams, who have found a new home after its founding family sold it off last year, have also found new hope because of the new influx of cash from its new owners and are expecting new investments in the coming years. How do we know the impact these regulations will have? Well, it is still early to measure how this cost cap has impacted teams, their performance and spending habits, but there has been a mental shift in the minds of the other 7 teams. 2022 is the first year in which the impact of these technical and financial rules will be fully apparent in the design of the cars and running of the teams. Although we don't expect it to fully impact the Big Three just yet, because there is still a short-term benefit from all the previous years of infrastructure and team organizational systems under their belt. This just means that although the cost cap is smaller, the money spent on non-regulated and unofficial items will remain the same. But like I said before, progress is progress. Some may still argue that it would have made better sense to introduce a cap that covers for all expenses rather than one that exempts some. How are each team spending and managing their team? If you haven't guessed by now, it is obvious that the Big Three would be facing challenges with this set spending limit. Being the top Formula One team comes with its own kind of flex. It means more access to funding, so they can typically do what smaller teams can't, like hire staff as large as small towns, spend money and months of engineers and engine development, car design, and all the other things in that line. It also means that they can test their cars a proper amount of times before the competitions start. That liberty will no longer be afforded them. The Big Three would have cut down on staff by at least 10%. Teams like Mercedes have said the staff they will be letting go of will not be fired, but put to work in other units of its corporation. Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari will no longer be able to spend heavily on engine development and testing, which are important to their pre-competition preparations. Not just the Big Three, but mid-level teams like McLaren are also constrained in this as well. This levels the playing field in a way, because the smaller teams haven't always been able to do adequate testing before competitions. On the other hand, these regulations have benefited the smaller teams to a larger extent. Team sponsors and investors have increased their funding in these teams. So, as anticipated by the sporting body, differences in the team budgets are less at just $5 to $20 million between them. This new inflow of cash sees teams making bolder decisions just because they feel they now stand a chance. Teams like Haas and Aston Martin are expected to increase their budget and are even planning to add over 200 new employees to the team. The idea behind the cap is a good one, and it is still too early to tell how effective it is, but we will be watching. What are your thoughts on the new budget cap? I would like to read and engage with you in the comments section. Like this video to support. You can also watch older videos where I talk about Formula One in very basic terms. Don't forget to subscribe so as to get notifications when new videos are released. Thank you.